Okay. In the last week, we've read Esther, we've read Joel, and today we start Daniel. And I will tell you now, if you don't read the emails, if there was ever a book to read the emails for, it would be Daniel. I don't know what the heck got into the water last year, but I went off writing the emails. Like, they are great emails. And I'm like, I don't know how I produced them, but they're really, really good. They're kind of long, but they're really helpful. Daniel's one of those books that is both known and understood, yet also people have like mixed feelings about or strange interpretations of. So I think the emails are actually really helpful. Like, I was skimming through them last night. I was like, oh, this is so great. This is so helpful. Like, I was learning from 1 year younger me. So read the emails if you really want to know about Daniel. With that, let me pray, and we'll go ahead and get started. Father, thanks for this beautiful morning. And thank you for a day that we get to celebrate with brothers and sisters in their baptism. God, we ask that this day would be glorifying to you as people display their faith in Jesus' life, death, and resurrection by picturing going through death and being resurrected up into life. So God, we ask that the picture of the gospel would impress upon our hearts, and that we would be more and more tangibly aware of your grace that is offered to us and active in our life. So God, now as we turn to your word, we ask that you would give us eyes to see and ears to hear, and we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. So this week we start Daniel today. We finished Daniel on Wednesday, I believe. And then we'll also read Haggai and Zechariah all before next Sunday. So I have like this tension of what do we actually do this morning? Because we also read Esther and we read Joel, which are also great books. So it's like, how do we just spend a little bit of time on all of them, or do we just dive into Daniel and see how far we can get? Either way, I'm going to make a decision in the moment. But Daniel, like human Daniel in the back, will you close those blinds because I am blinded by the sun? Thank you so much. As opposed to literary Daniel. Okay. Show of thumbs. How did reading go this week in Esther? Thumbs up, did all the reading. Thumbs down, did none of the reading. Okay. Show of thumbs. How did reading in Joel go? Thumbs up, did all the reading. Thumbs down, did none of the reading. Okay. What else did we read this week? We finished Ezra and Nehemiah. Nehemiah, am I right? Like pulling people's hair out at the end. So sad. Did you notice he prays 3 times in Nehemiah 13? And first he starts off, the first prayer is God, remember me for the good that I did. And then his second prayer is God, remember me because of your faithfulness. And then his third and final prayer that ends the book is God, remember me for my good. So it starts off, remember me for the good I did. And then it ends, just remember me for good. Like, do good for me because that's my only hope. And that's how the book ends. So Ezra and Nehemiah takes us from the end of exile through the rebuilding of the temple, Jerusalem's walls, and the community. So it takes us to the low 400s BC. And it's showing us a historic account, and it paints the portrait that the return from exile was kind of like a new Exodus. However, as you go through the book, there's these 3 cycles, first of altar and temple, and then of Torah, and then of wall, and each section ends very anticlimactically, where you're really disappointed and you're scratching your head. And the author of Ezra and Nehemiah, probably Ezra, is presenting it as like, yeah, this was part of the story of God's people, but this wasn't the fulfillment of God's promises. We're still waiting for a return from exile, even though we're in the land. So there's that book. Esther takes place right in that timeline, actually right before Ezra and Nehemiah would get sent back. So Ezra and Nehemiah, they're sent by King Artaxerxes. His father, Xerxes, which is the Greek name for Ahasuerus, that's the king who's king in the story of Esther. So if there's no story of Esther, then all the Jewish people would have gotten wiped out, and then there would be no Ezra and Nehemiah. So Ezra and Nehemiah kind of shows you the long timeline, and then Esther fits into there, just into a little section. So that's why we read that first, and then we read Esther. Let's actually jump to Esther. And I just want to point out a few things. Esther's a really interesting book. I bet if you have questions about it, just ask Kathleen, because she wrote a study for it like last year. So she probably knows more about it than I do. But Esther is the only book in the Bible where God is never mentioned. Not just the name of God, but actually God is never mentioned in the Bible, or excuse me, in the book of Esther. So that's actually caused people sometimes to be like, why is this book in here? It's so strange. But clearly, as you read the book of Esther, it's all about the providential workings of God behind the scenes, where everything seemed to happen, or by chance, or it just so happened that, and it's all these quote unquote coincidences that happen leading up to the deliverance of God's people. If you jump to the very end of Esther chapter 10, we actually, I think, get some details about how this book was written. So the book concludes, King Ahasuerus imposed tax on the land and on the coastlands of the sea, and all the acts of his power and might, and the full account of the high honor of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him. Are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Media and Persia? That line right there is a common line that you read in both the book of Kings, but also the book of Chronicles. I'll show you real quick. So if we went to the end of First Chronicles, thus David, the son of Jesse, reigned over all Israel. The time that he reigned over Israel was 40 years. He reigned 7 years in Hebron and 33 years in Jerusalem. Then he died at a good age, full of days, riches, and honor. And Solomon, his son, reigned in his place. Here's the important verse. Now, the acts of King David, from first to last, are written in the Chronicles of Samuel the seer, and in the Chronicles of Nathan the prophet, and in the Chronicles of Gad the seer, with accounts of all his rule and his might, and of the circumstances that came upon him and upon Israel and upon all the kingdoms of the countries. In other words, the author of Chronicles is sitting very downstream at this point. He's writing sometime post-exile. We know that because of the genealogies that we all love to read before bed. So he's writing, and he's writing about David, which from his perspective was like 5, 6, maybe even 700 years earlier. So he wasn't there witnessing the story of David unfold. What he has is historic records that were kept and written by people like Samuel the seer and Nathan the prophet and Gad the seer. So he's, as a historian, he's telling you his written sources that he's going to. He says, if you really want to know just about David's life, well, here's my resources. Like, go down to the local library. You can check them out. They didn't actually have local libraries in that sense, but he goes down and he's using that material to compose, and he's selecting material to then put in front of us the book of Chronicles. That is exactly how the book of Esther ends. Someone down the stream who wrote the book of Esther, they're saying, now, if you want to know about Ahasuerus, everything he did, also, if you want to know everything about Mordecai, who's like the main hero of the story next to Esther, if you want to know about Mordecai and all of his status, it's written in the Chronicles of the Kings of Media and Persia. So somehow this author is sitting downstream enough to where Mordecai is probably not alive anymore. So they're probably maybe time of Ezra and Nehemiah, or a little bit after. Maybe this is written by Ezra. But because of that, the book Esther, it's not just telling you about what historically unfolded. It's also been crafted to give a theological lens to the events. So from start to finish, the book of Esther is a chiasm. If you watch the video that we watched for each book of the Bible, it shows you this. It's beautiful, where the ends mirror each other, and it all centers on chapter 5, where all of a sudden there's this huge reversal. Remember Haman? Boo! No one likes Haman because Haman's a psychopath. He's literally a lunatic. Like, one time he gets a promotion and he's like, all right, everyone bow down to me. And then Mordecai, being a faithful Jew, doesn't bow down to him. He's like, who is that dude? And someone's like, oh, that's Mordecai from the tribe of Judah, the Benjaminite. He's like, oh, nice. Let's kill all of the Jewish people everywhere. Like, that's his conclusion. And he's willing to pay like millions of dollars to do it. Psychopath. So he sets up this giant pole, 75 feet tall. He says, yeah, I'm not only going to kill all the Jewish people, I'm going to hang Mordecai on this. All of that leads to chapter 5, where all of a sudden it gets reversed, where Mordecai gets exalted by King Ahasuerus, and guess who ends up on the pole? Haman, because Haman sucks. That's like the whole point of the story. Haman sucks. Also, in Esther 9, you read about the formation of the holiday Purim. The word pur is like what we would say dice or a lot to cast, because that's what Haman began to roll to determine like when he was going to destroy the Jews. He gets super upset on like the first day of the month, and for 12 months he's just rolling dice. He's like, when am I going to destroy them? So he's rolling dice over and over and over again to seek their destruction, and yet it actually leads to Haman's destruction. So they have this holiday, this Jewish holiday, Purim, where they celebrate, and what they do is like they just give each other food. My kind of holiday, am I right? But you have a little description of why it's called Purim. So in starting in verse 25, actually I'll start in verse 24. For Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, Agagite, there was a king, Agag, in the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel chapter 15, who was a Canaanite king. And that's who King Saul was supposed to kill, but never did. So King Saul never kills King Agag. And now down the road, a few hundred years later, there's Haman the Agagite, who's trying to destroy the Jewish people, all because of Saul's failure. But who overcomes him? Mordecai. Mordecai is he is a better Saul. What tribe was Saul from? Oh, what tribe is Mordecai from? Benjamin. Oh, cool. Okay. Still in verse 24. Haman, the enemy of the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them and had cast pur, that is, lots, to crush and to destroy them. But when it came before the king, he gave orders in writing that his evil plan that he had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore, they call these days Purim. They call these days Purim. Think about what perspective that phrase is coming from. Like that assumes that this is a holiday now that like we celebrate as a people. We've been doing this for like at least a few years, and this is explaining why the Jewish people, call these days Purim after the term pur. Therefore, because of all that was written in this letter and of what they had faced in this matter, notice that it's like looking back, like this is the distant past. Because of what Haman wrote in this letter and because of what the people had faced in this matter and of what had happened to them, the Jews firmly obligated themselves and their offspring. It's like, that's us now. Their offspring and all who joined them, that without fail they would keep these 2 days according to what was written and at the time appointed every year, that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, to every clan, province, and city, and that these days of Purim should never fall into disuse among the Jews, nor should the commemoration of these days cease among their descendants. So this book is an explanation of the holiday Purim. It's like what it's doing sitting here. But then the way the book is organized, it has all of these melodies of earlier biblical stories. So I'll just point out a few real quick. So turn back to Esther 1. If you read the emails, this will be a review.
Some of the Jews still celebrate Purim?
They sure do. Yeah. Yeah, it's the only holiday, main holiday that they celebrate that isn't in the Torah. So all the other holidays are in the Torah. Like you could go to Leviticus 23 and read about it. But then Purim is a holiday that they celebrate. And this is the explanation for why they celebrate it. Yeah, Hanukkah is also. Thanks for reminding me about that. Yep, that's about, what is his name? Maccabee, yeah, the Maccabean revolt. Yeah, which is not a story told in the Bible, but is in the Deuterocanonical stories, 1st and 2nd Maccabees. Okay, that's the lighting of the candles. Okay, chapter 1 of Esther. In the days of Ahasuerus, who reigned from India to Ethiopia, the entire world, over 127 provinces. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in Susa. Where is Susa? It originally was the capital of the Empire of Babylon. So he's in Babylon. They moved in, they took out Babylon, and the king sets up his throne where the king of Babylon used to sit. So he's sitting in Susa in the 3rd year of his reign. And so this helps us date it to 483 BC. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a feast for all of his officials and servants. And the army of the Persia and Media, they all came together. And while he showed the riches of his royal glory and splendor, the pomp of his greatness for many days, 180 days. So he gets everyone together and he's like, let's party 180 days straight. And when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, the citadel, both great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. Okay, so the scene is set. 7 days in a garden. All right, 7 days in a garden. What does that like immediately make you think of? Yeah, Eden. Genesis chapter 1 and 2. God creates everything in 7 days, and then all of a sudden you read a story about a garden. So I wonder what day the story is going to take place on. Well, we keep reading. He has all these beautiful clothes. It's awesome. Verse 7, drinks were served in golden vessels, vessels of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. Oh, so they got a lot of wine. What does wine come from? Yeah, what are grapes? Fruit. Okay, so here is the king. 7 days in the garden with some fruit, lots of fruit. Can you think of any stories that like revolve around fruit or wine? What does Noah do right after he gets off the ark? He plants a garden and then gets belligerently drunk, and then something sketchy happens with him and his sons. There's that story of Lot and his daughters get him really drunk on wine, and then something sketchy happens. Oh, and there's that story of Adam and Eve in a garden, and they take from a certain type of tree and they eat it. See this pattern unfolding? So I don't know. How is this story gonna go at the beginning? Still in verse 8. And drinking was according to the edict. There is no compulsion. No need to drink, just if you want, you know? What a good king. For the king had given orders to all the staff in of his palace to do as each man desired. Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Ahasuerus. So the dudes are partying with the dudes, the girls are partying with the girls. You know, you don't want any funny business happening, keep it separate. On the 7th day, in a garden, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, when he's drunk on wine, he commanded his 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, in order that she could be seen by the peoples and the princes of her beauty. For she was good to look at. The word lovely right there is the Hebrew word tov. She was good of sight. So the king thinks, you know what? While he's in his garden on the 7th day, he says, my wife is good to see. So he's like, let's bring her in here. What does that sound like? The garden, Genesis chapter 3, verse 6. This is Eve. She saw that the tree was good and to be desired for food, so she took it. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, delivered by the eunuchs. At this, the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him. So it's like the king, he's in the garden, and it's like he wants to bring in his wife as if she is the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil to parade in front of everybody. It's like he's in the role of the snake in the story. But then his wife says no. And he gets very, very upset at this. So much so that then he starts talking to his 7 princes. 7, 7, 7, 7. Notice the repetition of 7. That's just a detail that you don't have to include, yet the author is including that specific detail. So he meets with his 7 princes, and he's like, oh man, what should we do? And And they're like, well, because the queen said no to you, now all the women everywhere are going to say no to their husbands and there's going to be chaos. You should decree that all the husbands are masters over their wives so that this never happens again. And you should kick out the queen. Great logic. Okay. But here, starting in verse 18, this very day, the noble women of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will say the same to all the king's officials. And there will be contempt and wrath in plenty. If it pleases the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repealed, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all of his kingdom, for it is vast, it's really big, all the women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. This advice was good in the eyes of the king. That the phrase, it pleased the king, every time you see that in the book of Esther, it's actually the expression was good in the eyes of. Can you think of any other stories where people do what's good in their own eyes? The book of Judges, the book of Genesis. This is like the constant fall stories that people do what's right in their own eyes or what's good in their own eyes. And it's actually King Ahasuerus doing what is good in his own eyes that's going to lead to like the downfall of Haman and the exaltation of God's people. God's going to somehow work together the evil intent of people for the good of his own people. What they intend for evil, God intends for good. It's that pattern of Genesis, the end of Genesis, the Joseph story. Verse 21, this advice was good in the eyes of the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan proposed. You know that stuff when you have a bellyache? Memucan. He sent letters to all the royal province, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language, that every man may be master in his own household and speak according to the language of his people. Okay, so verse 18, the worry is that now the wife will rebel against the husband. So they say, okay, well, the husband should rule over the wife. You picking up what I'm putting down, anyone?
Genesis.
All right, Genesis chapter 3, part of the curse of the fall. This is what God is saying to the woman. I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing or child rearing, raising up children. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. The Medo-Persian Empire is playing out the fall story, where they have now fallen, and the result is they're like, oh my gosh, our wives are going to desire things that are contrary to us, so we should rule over them with the iron fist. They're playing the Genesis story out over and over and over again. You think it's cool yet? Okay, all right. Okay, then you get to Esther chapter 2. And it's like the story continues. So, again, the idea is like, okay, well, we're done with Queen Vashti. We need to get a new queen. Hey, King Ahasuerus, how about you have this pageant and you bring all the young women who have not been married, who are still virgins, you bring them before you, the ones who are good of sight, the ones who look good, and you decide the one that you want. And in verse 4, let the young women who are good in your eyes to the king be queen instead of Vashti. And this was good in the eyes of the king. That's a great idea, guys. Let's do it. Now, there was a Jew in Susa. Okay, this term Jew keeps showing up, and we actually haven't been hearing this in the Bible until we got to Ezra and Nehemiah, and now this. Like, what's going on? What are these people typically called in our Bible? That's really ancient. That, like, Abraham was a Hebrew. Jonah calls himself a Hebrew. Israelites. People are called Israelites. Right here, now Jew, it is the expression Judahite, but if you keep reading, is Mordecai from the tribe of Judah?
No.
No, he's from the tribe of Benjamin. So what happens is after the northern kingdom is disposed in what year? 722 BC. So they're gone out of the picture. But then here's where that 5 comes in. The southern kingdom, which is called Judah, they're taken out by the Babylonians in 605 to 586 BC. So the southern kingdom, called Judah, had the tribe of Judah in it and the tribe of Benjamin, and then Levites scattered throughout it. So their national identity was the kingdom of Judah. So you abbreviate that as Judahite, and we shorten that with the word Jew. So when you hear the expression Jew or Jewish person, you are referring to a post-exile people group. Post-exile people group. As you read this in the original language, though, it doesn't just say Jew. It just says, basically, there's one from Judah in Susa. So the way you're first introduced to Mordecai is that he is one from Judah. Why is Judah important in our Bible? The king will come from Judah. And what chapter do I hear about that in? Matt? Genesis 49. You were just asking me about Genesis 49. So Genesis 49, there's a promise that from the tribe of Judah will come kings. A king who will hold the scepter and it will never depart from the tribe of Judah. Who's the first king from the tribe of Judah? David. Yep. And then God makes a promise to David that one of his descendants will sit on the throne forever and it'll be glorious. If I wanted to read about that promise, where could I turn to in 2 Samuel? 2 Samuel chapter 7. This whole story is going to be about one of Judah who is exalted in a foreign court, who then is given dominion over all the land as second in command, and his power is exceedingly great, and he speaks peace to his people, and he seeks their good. That's what the story is about. Is it really about Mordecai? Well, I mean, it's telling you the things that happened to Mordecai, but it's about one from Judah who is exalted and brings liberation and salvation to his people, and he's exalted to the second seat of power over everything. I wonder if the Bible is going to lead to someone who is exalted above all the kingdoms of the earth, who brings salvation and peace and goodness to his people. Yes. And I wonder if he's going to be from the tribe of Judah. Okay, so there was one of Judah in Susa the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite. Oh, son of Kish. What tribe? What descendant was Saul from? Kish. Yeah, the way Mordecai is set up is as a better Saul, a better king from the tribe of Benjamin, who's really going to conquer the enemy. It says that he had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried when Jeconiah was king. Timeline-wise, it would have probably been his parents that were taken away. So he was probably born in Babylon, just as far as the timing works out. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther. So the entire book we know her as Esther. Her Hebrew name, though, is Hadassah. Hadassah, I think I put a note down. It means like myrtle, which is a type of like a type of tree bush thing. So it's gonna be a story about this like tree girl who's going to enter into the garden palace and bring life to the people. Okay, that was. So we're introduced to her, and oh, by the way, she was a young woman, and she had a beautiful form, and she was good to look at. This is the same description as Joseph. Joseph is described like this in chapter 39 of Genesis with Potiphar's wife. So Joseph was good in form and he was beautiful. And what happens to him in the foreign court? Exalted to power. All right. This is also the description of David. And, there's that story where David is fleeing and he goes to the Philistines and he's in a foreign court. And what happens to him in that foreign court? Exalted. And, this is also the description that we see today in our reading of this guy named Daniel. And Daniel in Babylon, what happens to Daniel in a foreign court? All right. So foreign court, exalted up into glory and to power. This is the story of, there's this hope that someone from this family is going to be exalted in this way and bring life for the people. Okay, you know what? There's so much we could do in Esther, but we just don't have time. Let's go to Daniel. We won't look at it, but in Esther, there is all, never mind. There's cool stuff. Maybe next year. Okay. Ask Kathleen about it later. She knows. Okay. Watch the YouTube video, the Bible Project YouTube video on Daniel. It'll be very helpful for you. The design of this book is incredible. Chapters 2 through 7 are chapters that mirror each other, where chapter 2 and chapter 7 mirror each other. They're both about there are these dreams about these 4 kingdoms that then the dream needs interpretation. One is Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the other one is Daniel's dream. Then chapter 3 and chapter 5 mirror each other, and both of those stories are stories of God's people remaining faithful in the midst of persecution, where they're thrown into a pit of death and yet delivered. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into fire, but then Daniel into the lion's den. And then chapter 4 and 5 mirror each other. Chapter 4 and 5 are 2 stories about 2 different kings. One is humbled and then repents, so he is exalted back to a position of power. The other one is humbled and does not repent, and the kingdom is stripped from his control. So there is that narrative structure in it. Chapter 1 is kind of like an introduction. But then also chapter 7 through the end is all prophetic literature, while the former chapters are narrative chapters. And then there's also a really interesting design with the language, where chapter 1 is written in Hebrew, but then chapter 2 through 7 is written in Aramaic, which would have been the trade language that would have been being spoken in the Babylonian Empire at the time. And then once you get to chapter 7, it switches back to Hebrew. So the way the language works is also really interesting in its design. We don't see that because it's all in English. What we're going to do with the rest of the time is we're just going to read as far as we can. Sound good? Okay. Chapter 1, verse 1. Man, the allergies are getting me today. Okay. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. That's the year 605 BC. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar. The land of Shinar. Where have I heard about the land of Shinar before? What's the first place I heard about the land of Shinar? Tower of Babel. Yes, Genesis chapter 11. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they settled there. And they built a tower. They're like, let's make a great name for ourselves. So the story in Genesis 11 of the Tower of Babel, the Tower of Babylon, is in the plains of Shinar. So already the way Daniel is being introduced to us, the book, rather than saying in the land of Babylon, they're using this older name, the land of Shinar, be like referring to this instead of the land of Eugene, the land of the Willamette Valley. Right? We know what that means, but it's an older name for it. To connect these stories in our minds between the story of Genesis chapter 11 and the story that we're about to read. He brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal seed and of the nobility. That word, it's not the word family there, it's the word seed. And we have been waiting for a seed. Usually seed gets translated as offspring. Where in my Bible am I set up to expect an offspring? Genesis 3 is the first spot. God says to the woman that your offspring, your seed, will crush the head of the serpent. And then we get to Genesis 12, 15, and 17. And God makes a promise to who? Abraham. That Abraham would have a seed. Then we follow that family. It becomes the family of Israel. And there's a promise made at the end of the book of Genesis to the tribe of Judah that there will come a seed from that family. And that promise is picked up in the book of Numbers, that a seed in the water will hold the scepter. And then David is told that one of his seed will sit on the throne. So now we are looking at the royal seed. So we have all this expectation in our mind. As soon as we start reading this story, oh, the royal seed, the one who's supposed to crush the head of the serpent, the one who from this family is going to come the new David to save the people. So Nebuchadnezzar brings all these people to the land, both of the royal seed and of the nobility, the people who would serve in the royal court. Youths without blemish. The expression is usually translated as, it's usually translated as blemish. Sometimes it gets translated as blameless. But that's the word that's used all throughout your book of Leviticus to talk about sacrificial lambs, that they should be without blemish. So here is the king of Babylon inviting the seed of the offspring to come. But the way that they're described like sacrificial lambs, young sacrificial lambs. And they have good form, good appearance. This is that phrase that was used about Esther. And they're also skillful in all wisdom. That word skillful first shows up in Genesis 3 about the tree. The tree seemed to make one wise or skillful. It also shows up in a few other notable places. It's the word that describes the suffering servant in Isaiah 52, verse 13. It's also the word that describes Joshua if he meditates on God's instruction that he will be skillful. Joshua 1:7 and 1:8. It's also the word that describes David. So you're being introduced to these royal seeds, and they're like sacrificial lambs. They look good like Joseph, and they're really wise in all wisdom. They're endowed with knowledge and understanding, learning, and they're really competent to stand in the king's palace and to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans, another term for Babylonians. So King Nebuchadnezzar wants to bring them in, and he wants to basically recalibrate them. He says, give me the people who are really young and really bright so that we can teach them our ways. We're going to teach them our language. We're going to teach them our tradition. We're going to even give them new names. The king assigned them daily portion of food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. Among the royal seed and the nobility were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. So all of these guys right here, they're descendants of David. You're about to read stories about descendants of David. And are descendants of David important to us? Yes, very important. And the chief eunuchs gave them names. Yeah.
It doesn't say.
They're from...
It says Judah, but it doesn't say David.
Well, they're from the royal family.
And nobles.
And nobility. It's assumed that they're probably at least one of them in this royal family.
Possibly.
Yeah, they might all be nobility, but nobility might also be people in the family. So royal seed might refer specifically to the one who's next in line, and nobility might be like the extended family. Like the second born son isn't first in line to be king, but he's still nobility, and he's of the royal family. And that first wave of exile that we know in the other books is primarily just the royal family that's taken out. That's why we're all worried in the book of Kings. Yeah. Thank you for the pushback. Verse 7. The chiefs of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel, he called Belteshazzar, a new name that is a Babylonian god, like a worship of Babylonian god. Hananiah, he called Shadrach. Mishael, he called Meshach. And Azariah, he called Abednego. But Daniel resolved, or he established in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. Defile himself? Why would he think it would defile himself? Why would he think that the king's food would defile him? Unclean, according to what? The Torah. Okay. So he has resolved that he is not going to eat what he's not supposed to eat according to Torah. In other words, he's going to remain faithful to Torah. He's going to eat kosher. And he's not going to eat the king's food because it's not kosher. That's why that word defile is showing up here twice. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord, the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you were in worse condition than the youths who were of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. The eunuch's basically like, look, bro, if you don't eat, I get in trouble. Could you just scarf down the food? Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter, and he tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. Okay. Some people look at this story and they're like, see, vegetables are healthy, eat vegetables, drink water. It leads to like abundant healthiness. That's not the point of this story. In fact, like the logical thing that should happen is just eating vegetables and drinking water, you should begin to die over the course of 10 days. The point is that it's radically unexpected that by simply eating vegetables and drinking water, that they would actually become more healthy. This is God's faithfulness to his people being faithful. It's not eat vegetables only, don't eat meat. They've resolved not to defile themselves with what is unclean. So this is a radical test to be able to see over the course of 10 days, they should begin to like decompose, as it were, and be skin and bones in the matter of minutes. And yet God preserves them in their moment of trial because they're being faithful. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. I wonder if that's going to be important in the very next chapter. At the end of the time, at the end of those 3 years of studying, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they stood before the king. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding, we've heard that before, about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the 1st year of King Cyrus. Okay, so you just got a time domain from 605 BC all the way to 539 BC. It's a pretty big timeline. Daniel was there for all of it. 605 to 539. Daniel was there. Notice the repetition of 10. They're going to be tested for 10 days, and then the king finds them to be 10 times better. So that repetition of 10, that's going to start showing up again later at the end of the book of Daniel. The expression, in all matters of wisdom and understanding, we hear that in 2 notable places. The first time we hear that expression is with Joseph in the story in, I believe it's chapter 41, when he is brought before Pharaoh and he begins to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. And Pharaoh says, wow, have we ever found someone who has such wisdom and understanding, in whom is the Spirit of God? The next time we hear it is, I believe, in Deuteronomy chapter 4, Moses speaking to the people that if you read your Bible, it will be your wisdom and understanding before the people. And we've already found out that Daniel is aware of his Bible because he's not going to eat the food that defiles him. And lo and behold, he's found to be wise and understanding. It's as if he's someone who meditates on the Bible. So here we go. Now we read about a dream. In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, so this is second year of being king, but it's the third year that they've been there. It's just the way timing works out. It's kind of weird. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. His spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king commanded that the magicians, or the magi, what the word magi means, that the magi, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in, they stood before the king, and the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dreams, and we will show you the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruin. Wow. Okay. Super intense. So the Magi are really confident. Yeah. Yeah. What?
Verse 2, it's like listing. How come it lists what seems like types of people? It says types of description.
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question. Well, it's the magicians, the magi, enchanters, sorcerers are not just Chaldeans. So as we'll keep reading, Daniel becomes the chief magi. He's the chief magician. But he's not a Chaldean. He's not a Babylonian. So my intuitive thought would be that these are his counselors, and some are the ones who hold those offices, but then he also just has like his Chaldean bros who come in and he has counsel with. Mike, then Catherine.
It's just a footnote that I have no idea, but it makes sense. Chaldeans initially referred to a part of the Babylonian Empire. It developed into a descriptive term for a special group known for their knowledge about magic and interpreting dreams.
There you go. That's good. I like that for now.
Yeah, my note says developed into master astrologers.
Ah, sweet. Star Boys. Okay. A cult? No. We're considered a cult. A cult is a group that organizes themselves around one individual figure.
OCC.
I don't know what that word means.
OCCULT. Occult. It's the
Like the worship of demons.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're in Babylon worshiping false gods. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely a cult. Good word. I learned something today. Thank you. Okay, so the Star Boys show up, and they're like, King Neb, we got you covered. We are extremely confident that we can tell you what your dream means. Nebuchadnezzar responds, okay, if you can't, you all die. Whose life does that put in jeopardy?
Everybody's like,
Daniel's life. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. It puts their life at stake because they're a part of this crew now because they have been exalted to the place of wisdom and understanding. So their life is in peril in this moment. So they're going to need to resolve this. Okay, verse 6. But if you show the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and its interpretation. They answered a second time and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show its interpretation. The king answered and said, I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time because you see that the word from me is firm. If you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the times change. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation. So he doubles down. It's like, I'm not going to tell you my dream. You're going to tell me my dream. Hey, what am I thinking, Star Boys? All right, it's intense. The Chaldeans, the Star Boys, answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand, for no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magi or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king asked is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, those whose dwelling is not with flesh. There's where they're wrong, right? Because we know the Torah. Because of this, the king was angry and very furious, and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. Yikes! What's going to happen to Daniel? So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them, all because some Buster Star Boys over there were overly confident. Then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch. The captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree of the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel, and Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time. Basically, like, can we have a meeting before you kill me? That he might show the interpretation to the king. Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah, his companions, and told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So here they are, everyone is about to die, and here are our 4 faithful members from the family of Judah, and they're going to intercede on behalf of the many to spare their life. If somehow, by the mercies of God, they can stand in the way, everyone will live. 1 or 4 interceding so that the many will live. Okay. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belongs wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and he sets up kings. In other words, God is sovereignly in charge of everything in human history. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you. For you have made known to us the king's matter. Therefore Daniel went in to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show the king the interpretation. Don't kill them. Let me intercede. From the tribe of Judah. Okay. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste and said thus to him, I have found among the exiles from Judah a man who will make known to the king the interpretation. The king declared to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered the king and said, no wise men or enchanters or magi or astrologers can show to the king the mystery that the king has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. And he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Oh, there's a term that we've heard a lot in our Bible. Actually, not a lot, a few times. Genesis chapter 49. I believe Numbers 23. Twice in Deuteronomy. I think Deuteronomy 4 and then also 31. And then in the prophets, right? The latter days. The end of time. When this age comes to a close and the new age begins. Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar's king is somehow related to the latter days. Your dreams and the visions of your head as you lay in bed are these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed, came thoughts of what would be after this. And he who reveals mysteries made known to you what is to be. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because of any wisdom that I have more than any of the living, but in order that the interpretation may be made known to the king and that you may know the thoughts of your mind. So over and over again, Daniel is emphasizing, this isn't my wisdom. Over and over and over again. He's not taking credit. He's giving the glory to God in this situation. So now we're going to read what the dream is, and then we're going to hear the interpretation of the dream. Isn't it great that we don't have to try to decode what this dream is? In fact, the Bible just tells us what the dream is about. So don't get lost in the dream because the interpretation is coming. You saw, O king, a great image, an icon. This image, mighty and exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was terrifying. The head of the image was fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its mid and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly iron, partly clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand. It's usually an expression for like a meteor or something, or a rock that just exists. As you looked, a stone cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image at its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold, all together were broken in pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floor. And the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone, like the pebble or the small rock that struck the image, became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. What a crazy dream Nebuchadnezzar's having. Man. Probably all that wine he was drinking. Okay. All right. So then he says, this was the dream. Now I'll tell you the interpretation. Butters him up a little bit. O king, the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, and into whose hand he has given, wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field and the birds of heaven, making you rule over them. Beasts of the field, birds of heaven, making you rule over them. Back to Eden, Genesis chapter 1. This is what the image of God is supposed to do in Genesis chapter 1. I think if you read verses 24 through 26. This is the job description of the image of God, to rule over the beasts of the field, the birds of the heaven, to have dominion over everything that God has made, and it's given to humans. So, as the king who actually does have dominion over everything, Nebuchadnezzar is supposed to be like a fully functioning image of God. That's his role, at least. He has this dream. And now here is the interpretation of it. So no guesses. You are the head of gold. Thinking about that image, that statue, you're the head of gold. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks the pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage. Okay, so this one of these kingdoms is going to not really be ethnically distinct. More going to be like a conglomeration of ethnicities, but also going to be strong in some ways, weak in others. But they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. Okay, so the statue, what does the statue represent? Kingdoms. Great job. Good dream interpretation. You have wisdom and understanding. Verse 44. And in the days of those kings, referring to the soft clay and iron mixed kingdom, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end. It shall stand forever. Have we been waiting for a kingdom that's going to stand forever? Yeah, like the kingdom of the descendant of David, who's going to set up shop. Just as you saw that stone that was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, of bronze, clay, silver, and gold, a great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation sure. So the stone that crushed the statue and then turns into a mountain that fills the entire earth is, in the dream, the interpretation for that image is it's the kingdom of God invading earth and filling all the earth. So, real simple. What is the dream? He dreams of a statue and a rock that turns into a mountain. The statue represents 4 succeeding kingdoms, starting with Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and then going 4 kingdoms later. Then one of those kingdoms during that time, God is going to establish the kingdom of heaven. And the kingdom of heaven will invade the entire earth and will never be destroyed. And that is what's happening in the latter days. That's Jesus. If you're wondering who the kingdoms are, read my emails. Okay. We're going to keep going. But they are about real kingdoms in real time. Okay. That's going to be what chapter 7 is also about, just so you know. 2 dreams about kingdoms and about the kingdom of God. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel. It's the word worship right there. Paid homage. It's the word worship. He worshipped Daniel and commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him. That's like how you worship God. So what's going on here? Why is all of a sudden Nebuchadnezzar like worshiping Daniel? Maybe he thinks he's God. But is Daniel God? No. In fact, Daniel is really good about redirecting towards God, yeah? It's like, this isn't my wisdom and understanding. This isn't coming from me. The king answered and said to Daniel, truly, your God is God of gods. Oh, so maybe he doesn't think that Daniel's God. It's interesting. He's before Daniel. He's worshiping Daniel, but he says to Daniel, your God is God of gods and Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries. For you have been able to reveal this mystery. Then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon. Ruler over all of Babylon, the whole province, and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Daniel made a request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel remained at the king's court. The exaltation of someone from the tribe of Judah in a foreign court to be a dominant player over everything. Okay, before we move on from this, Nebuchadnezzar is experiencing Daniel revealing to him his dreams and the interpretation. And he falls down and worships him. Now, usually when people fall down and worship other people or even angelic beings, what's the response? Don't do that. Isn't it weird that's not in here? And yet, it's clear by what Nebuchadnezzar immediately says that Nebuchadnezzar doesn't think that Daniel is God, because he says, your God is God of gods. Yet he's worshiping Daniel. What is Daniel functioning as in Nebuchadnezzar's moment of worship? A mediator, an image of the true God. It's as if Daniel is just a faithful human who is faithfully following and committing himself to God's Torah, and by doing so, it feels to Nebuchadnezzar as if he is staring God in the face. Because Daniel is an image of God, just like everyone in this room is. But when images live according to God's will, God is seen more visibly and more clearly. Next story. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. Where did he get that idea? Something didn't register for him. He made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits. If you're wondering how high that is, times 60 by 1.5, and that's how many feet it is. Was 60 cubits high, and its breadth was 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Okay. So the people are in Babylon in a plain. Do I know any other stories that take place in the plains of Babylon? Oh yeah, Genesis chapter 11, in the plains of Shinar, where something big is built to make a name for oneself, and all the people of all the earth is there present. Remember that in Genesis 11? Everyone of the entire earth is present. So he sets this big thing up in the plains of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, and the counselors, and the treasurers, and the justices, and the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. All the provinces, all the domains of King Nebuchadnezzar coming. Then the satraps, prefects, and governors, and the counselors, and treasurers, and all those other dudes, they came to the dedication of the image of King Nebuchadnezzar that he had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And a herald proclaimed, a preacher stood up and preached aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace." They're commanded to do the very same thing that Nebuchadnezzar just did to Daniel. It's the same word. It's translated worship in chapter 3. It's translated as paid homage in chapter 2, verse 46. So the command of the king is to bow down and worship the image of the king. But it's the very thing that Nebuchadnezzar just did to Daniel. He bowed down and he worshiped the image of God. And who is present? Peoples, nations, languages. All the people of the earth are gathering together. Verse 7, therefore, as soon as all the people heard the sound of the horn and all those other instruments, every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So just like Genesis 11, you have this story that are taking place in the plains of Babylon, where all the peoples of the earth, as it were, are gathered together and worshiping this image thing, or this goal to exalt one's own name. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of these instruments shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the burning fiery furnace." Burning fiery. I like that. Like, it's not just like the burning furnace or the fiery furnace, the burning fiery furnace. You ever watch fire burn? It's crazy. Okay. No one? All right. Therefore, there are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Oh, trouble in Babylon. Where's Daniel? He took a trip. So remember at the end, when Daniel gets all that honor, he asked, "Hey, I want my boys to be in charge of the province of Babylon." But then we're told that Daniel stayed in the king's court. So Daniel's in Susa, in the king's court. And this is all taking place in the plains, like outside of Susa. So that's why Daniel's not present. But here are his boys. They pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Nebuchadnezzar was in furious rage, in a hot rage. And he commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound," like maybe you just didn't hear the music, "when you hear it, fall down and worship the image that I have made. Well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Challenge accepted. This is the same thing that Pharaoh says. Who is the God who can save you? It shows up also in the prophets. It's an accusation against God. So they give an answer. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to answer you at all." Good. We have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hands, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. What like a bold statement that they make. They're like, first of all, we don't even have to talk to you about this. But secondly, like if we did talk to you about this, God can deliver us. And he will deliver us. And even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow down to you because our allegiance goes to God. Then Nebuchadnezzar, filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against these men. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, throw them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. So this huge furnace thing, and the guys are like leading them in to throw them in, and they get so close that the heat actually kills them as they throw them in. Like that's how hot this fire is. So they're watching this, and all of a sudden the men of Babylon are dying as they throw them into the fire. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered, "Yeah, king, that's exactly what we did." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods, or a son of God." Throws them into the fire. Sometimes in the Bible, fire destroys people, yeah? When have we heard about fire destroying people? Sodom and Gomorrah, yeah, fire rains down from above. Jerusalem gets burned with fire. What about in the book of Leviticus? Anyone? Remember our boys Nadab and Abihu? Who, because they make unlawful sacrifice, scorched with fire and destroyed. But then in like the very next story, Moses does it faithfully and God shows up in fire and like everyone rejoices. So sometimes fire destroys people. Other times fire is like this good thing and it's the presence of God in the midst of his people. So, I mean, they just watched people die because they got too close to it. And yet inside this fire, the 3 of them are walking around and a 4th whose appearance was like a son of God. We're going to have another figure appear in chapter 7 who's going to be called one whose appearance was like a son of man. These 2 figures are going to be compared to each other, one like a son of God and one like a son of man. Nebuchadnezzar came to the door of the burning fiery furnace, and he declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." So they walked out of the fire very casually, and all the important officials, they saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come up from them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God." Nebuchadnezzar applauds them for this. He says, the angel who delivered his servants, the same expression in the book of Exodus, that it's the angel of God that delivers the people out of Egypt. Yeah? And Jude calls that person Jesus. Yeah.
I just suppose Daniel isn't mentioned.
I think he's still at the king's palace.
You think Daniel worshipped the image?
No, I just think he's at the king's palace. He's not present at these festivities. Because the parallel story that we're going to jump to next after we skip chapter 4 and 5 is going to be Daniel bowing down to God and not to the command of the king. So, two-story parallel. Verse 29, therefore, I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb. Oh, the same thing that was going to happen to the Magi in the last chapter. And their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. End of story. So here in this story, all the peoples of the earth are gathered together, as it were. Representatives from all the nations of the earth are here at this place in the valley or in the plains of Babylon. And it culminates with this decree of the king that no one is allowed to speak against God and all have to honor him. All the earth gathered together in allegiance to God. What is this story Daniel setting us up for? Daniel 7 will just show it to us, but okay. We're going to skip chapter 4 and chapter 5. Even though it's awesome, read the emails. Go to Daniel chapter 6. So my plan right now is that next week we talk about 7 through the end of Daniel. So I'm saving the juicy stuff. Okay. It pleased Darius. Darius. Who's Darius? The king of the Medo-Persian Empire. So we're like way forward in history now. Nebuchadnezzar is long dead. Now we're dealing with the Medo-Persian Empire. Chapter 5 is about the overturn from the Babylonian Empire to the Medo-Persian Empire. But here's Darius. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps. Remember reading about them in the book of Esther? And also in Ezra and Nehemiah? He set up these satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one of them, to whom these satraps should give an account, so that the king might suffer no losses. So Daniel is top dog over all the top dogs of the province. Like, he's a very, very powerful and important person. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. So people just get jealous of Daniel. How come he gets all the glory and honor? But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful. There's like one note that rings out through this book. Daniel is faithful. Daniel is faithful in exile. Daniel is faithful in the midst of opposition. Daniel is faithful when culture opposes his faith. And God is faithful to his people who are faithful. He delivers them from the fire. He delivers them from the mouth of the lion. In book of, I think it's 2 Timothy, Paul's about to die, and he makes this reference that, you know what, God has always delivered me from the mouth of the lion. God is faithful to those who are faithful. Okay. They couldn't find any ground of complaint or any fault because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, we shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. It's our only way to get him. So then these high officials, they came to an agreement to the king and said to him, oh, King Darius, live forever. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects, and all of us, we agree that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man, just for 30 days, 1 month, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. We saw that come into play in Esther. Once they make a decree, like the decree stands, you can't revoke a decree. You can just make a new one that maybe counteracts it. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and the injunction. Like, he's probably a new king at this point. He's like, all right, great, yeah, we'll let people make petition to me just for 1 month. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open towards Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, "O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any other god within these 30 days, that they should be killed in the lion's den?" King answered and said, "The thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked." Then they answered and said before the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, for the injunction you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day." And the king heard these words, and he had much distress, and he set his mind to deliver Daniel. He wants to rescue Daniel. And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came in agreement to the king, and they said, "Know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king established can be changed." The king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the lion's den. Okay, so chapter 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego won't bow down to King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, chapter 6, Daniel won't stop bowing down to the Lord of heaven and earth, to Yahweh. Verse 16 still. The king declared to Daniel, "May your God whom you serve continually deliver you." He's like, your only hope is your God. And a stone was brought and laid at the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and the sign of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his place and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. So now all of a sudden it seems like the king is making intercession for Daniel, just as Daniel made intercession for the satraps before, the magi and the star boys. Then at break of dawn, the king arose and went in haste to the den of the lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God." Servant of God? Do I know about any servants of the Lord? Yeah. Let's just think about the one in Isaiah, yeah? What happens to the servant of the Lord in Isaiah? Suffers, and then what happens? Exalted into glorious life where he forms a new community. You want to just think about Job real quick? Servant of God who suffers and then is brought up out of his suffering and intercedes for the Gentile friends. Okay. So here's Daniel, the servant of the living God. Has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel." The angel again, like the one who was in the fire. "And shut the lion's mouth, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm." Then the king was exceedingly glad, and he commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. So the story over and over again is about a seed from the line of Judah who will trust God and enter into the pit of destruction or the fiery furnace. And yet God will deliver and exalt into glory. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. So just like the men who were destroying Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are destroyed before they even enter into the pit, so also the men and their families are destroyed before they even reach the bottom. So in both stories, the faithful seed of Judah defeats the enemy through submission and death. Like entering into their own death is how they have victory over the enemy. Not through fighting them, but through the submission of death. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in the earth, "Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and he rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. End of the narratives. Over and over and over and over again, the stories in Daniel are setting us up with anticipation that God is going to establish his kingdom of heaven on earth over all things. It's going to take over the world. And the way we see it playing out is through the seed of Judah, the descendant of David, who enters into death, trusting God, and then is exalted out of the pit of death into glory and honor and dominion and given authority over all things. That's the point of the book of Daniel. And that is what Jesus fulfills in the New Testament when we get there. So this is nothing more than gospel anticipation, that someone would intercede on our behalf, that he would enter into death, and through his death, he would have victory over the enemies. And he'd be exalted out of death and be exalted and enthroned at the right hand of God. That's going to be Daniel chapter 7. So keep reading. We read a lot. Reread it. Read the emails. And next week, we'll talk about chapter 7 through the end. Let me pray for us, and then we're good to go. Father, thank you for this morning. God, thank you for the faithfulness of Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, not only as an example and a witness for how to remain faithful in the midst of a turbulent culture. God, we want to be like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We want to say that we trust that you can and you will deliver us, and even if you don't, we will trust you anyways, and we won't bow down to others. But God, thank you for giving us the better Daniel and the better Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, someone who does intercede on our behalf before you, who does so continually throughout all time. Thank you that Jesus lived and he died and he entered into the pit of death. And God, that you exalted him 3 days later into victorious life. God, you invite all of us into that life through faith, through trusting the faithfulness of Jesus. So God, help us today trust that and help us celebrate that today with the baptisms. So God, we love you and we need you. Pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
And